Okay, welcome everybody, and my name is Bernie Garrett. On behalf of the CASN Research and Scholarship Committee, I'm happy to welcome to all of you to the October session of our 2017-2018 Lunch and Learn series. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concept of Lunch and Learn, where faculty members come together during their lunch break to share with one another projects they've been working on and to dialogue and discuss methodologies, successes and challenges they've encountered in their work. And this webinar series encompasses that aim and is intended to serve as an inspiration and a networking opportunity for participants while recreating the collegial feel of the Lunch and Learn experience. So, in this second session of our 2017-18 series, we're going to hear from Sarah Kostiuk-Linford, who is a faculty member at the Saskatchewan Collaborative Bachelor of Science in Nursing program at Saskatchewan Polytechnic. Sarah is going to be sharing with us today her experiences of undertaking collaborative research and what true collaboration means with partners. Sarah will use her project on communication between patients and students to illustrate the importance and effectiveness of collaboration in research projects. So after Sarah's presentation, we'll have some time for questions, and to submit a question for Sarah, please use the question and answer function on your screen. Once you've finished typing your question, don't forget to hit send to make it appear on the screen. And now I'll turn the session over to Sarah. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Bernie. Just trying to see. Okay. I hope the slide moves for everyone. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be here today to speak at the Lunch and Learn session. I'm very honored to be here. Today I'm going to, as Bernie mentioned, I'm gonna begin by talking about the theme of collaboration, just because it just makes sense in my head to talk about the theme a bit so that you can think about that as I'm going to talk about a collaborative project that I had recently engaged in. And then after that, I'll discuss more about collaborative research in relation to that project, kind of reflecting on what went well, what worked for me and what I've learned moving forward. And the point of today's session is to really provide insight and share knowledge on collaborative research so that as everyone moves forward, we can better carry out collaborative research in our own projects. And I hope that some of you today also form new connections and potentially collaborate together as you're being here today. So I'll just begin here. Hopefully everyone can hear me well. So this slide here, I just wanted to talk a bit about collaborative research. When you reflect on the term collaborative research, what words come to mind? And I don't know if people want to shoot out some words. When I think of collaborative research, I think about 2 or more people coming together to do research. I think about teamwork. I think about working together towards the same goal. I see it as an active relationship that's going on at the same time. I see it as ongoing and integrative. And there's probably more words to describe it, but just to kind of think about in your head what collaboration and what collaborative research means to you. Who might engage in collaborative research? Probably the obvious might be university researchers. It could be community-based organizations coming together to combine and do a project. It can be policymakers who will work together, and it can be patients who will collaborate with maybe a researcher or a health professional. Why do we want to carry out collaborative research? Oops, I moved ahead here, trying to flip my pages. To me, collaborative research, some of the benefits are that it offers you different perspectives. It can strengthen the study, such as the design, protocols, and whatnot. It helps share the workload and professional growth. I know that from my projects that I've worked on with other colleagues, when I do collaborative work, I always end up growing because they bring their own insight and their own knowledge, and I can grow from that. You also can get more funding if you do collaborative research, and you have support. You have support of that colleague in the research that you can talk to, and when things get stressful and whatnot, you have each other as support. And it's easier to achieve a common goal if you work together with someone than if you work by yourself. And again, that's probably sharing the workload. You also can increase resources. So you can see that there's a lot of benefits towards working together. So one of the projects that I worked on was called Profiling Specific Nurse-Patient Situations for Effective Communication in Entry-Level Practice for nursing students in Saskatchewan. I conducted this study with Dr. Eben Aries, who's an assistant professor with the University of Regina School of Nursing. Our collaboration was beneficial from the start. For one, it assisted us to receive a collaborative grant to complete the study. So as I mentioned before, you can get more funding, as well as it helped us share the workload too, because we only had a year to get it done, and it was in several phases. So this research project aimed to identify and create a profile of relevant and appropriate nurse-to-patient situations that nursing students should be able to effectively communicate before graduating and entering into clinical practice. And I feel that we really benefited working on this in collaboration because Eben's work really complemented mine. Just the way he thinks, it really brought something special that I wouldn't have had if he wasn't on this project with me. So to give you a little bit more about the study, I'll give you a little bit of the background. So communication is essential. It's a competency for nurses. We need it to provide quality care. The systematic literature reviews of, of studies on communication in nursing identified that there's a need to clearly define the concept of communication skills so that there's a consistent one that occurs between nurse and patients and their interactions. The standards of practice in Canada are that nurses must be able to develop therapeutic relationships with clients and in different situations. And more specifically, there needs to be a relationship between the nurse and the patient, and they have to do this by having nurse-to-patient communication. So nurse-patient communication can be defined as a two-way process that involves verbal and nonverbal communication in the exchange of information between a patient and a nurse, and the nurse would be the one caring for the patient. Communication between nurses and patients can be challenging, as it is often occurring in a situation that is less ideal for the patient. So communication that occurs between the patient and the nurse goes beyond simply passing on a message. It requires listening, thinking, interacting, caring. It requires that there's a purpose, that there's planning, et cetera, et cetera. Poor nurse-patient communication, as probably all of you know, it can lead to adverse events, and it also can lead to patients being unsatisfied with their care that they're receiving from the nurse. Research studies identified that there's a need for nursing students in Saskatchewan to improve their communication skills with patients. A recent survey on patient experiences from the Saskatchewan Quality Health Council showed that only approximately 69% of patients were happy with the communication they received from the nurses. So there's an area that we can improve. So educators must improve the way that we teach students communication skills with their patients. There's a need to better help the nursing students to link the communication theory into the practice. Nursing students are generally taught an identified set of basic communication skills, such as interviewing, empathy, and whatnot, with helping skills. But the literature suggests that there's a need to expand on this approach and teach communication skills that are specific to different situations, and that we need to set a better standard on how communication is taught as well as evaluated in our nursing programs. So that's a little bit of the background of where we came to develop this project. So there's evidence to show from the literature that there's a lack of clarity in the understanding of defining the term communication skills in nurse-patient situations among nurses. The body of literature also shows there's a lack of understanding around what specific nurse-patient situations should nursing students be able to demonstrate effective communication skills in before they enter practice. So our objectives for our study were to understand the meaning and define communication skills in nurse-patient situations, and to develop a profile of nurse-patient situations that nursing students should be able to communicate effectively before graduating and entering practice, and to identify relevant and appropriate strategies to effectively integrate these nurse-patient communication situations in undergraduate curriculum to improve the students' communication skills and competencies in those. So basically, the ultimate goal was we wanted to improve nursing curriculum. The methodology we used was a sequential exploratory mixed method research design. The sequential nature of the study started with a qualitative phase where we explored, and then it was followed by a quantitative phase. So there's two phases. We collected interview data in the first phase, and we collected an electronic survey data for the second phase. And I'll elaborate more on the slides to come. So to accomplish our objectives 1 and 2 of the study, so our phase, essentially our phase 1, we explored the definition of communication in nurse-patient situations and developed a profile of the nurse-patient situations by using a phenomenological qualitative design. So we interviewed faculty and we used semi-structured interview questions. We hired a research assistant and we trained them because it was faculty members within our nursing program. And the interviews were recorded. We transcribed them verbatim. We used a professional transcriber. The data was analyzed using open coding methods to identify themes that captured the participants' understandings of the meanings of communication skills and the nurse-patient situations. After that, and we had all the data, kind of goes on here. You can see we also did a literature study, and so we took the qualitative study, the qualitative data, and we also did then a literature review and combined what we found, and then we created a modified tool, and I'll explain that more later. Probably should have adjusted those slides. So the interview data was analyzed using an inductive approach. The data was prepared. We looked at the whole interview and read it several times to get a general understanding. And then the data was organized using open coding. We reread the interviews and we wrote notes and headings on the margin. The headings were grouped based on comparisons regarding their similarities and differences. And then we repeated this process for each interview. Through abstraction, main themes were formulated. Rigor was ensured by judging the data was dependable, transferable, applicable, and consistent. And we also made sure that we had consensus between myself and my co-partner. So we met regularly, we discussed a lot, and we worked together throughout. The credibility of the data was established through combining our expertise. Raw data was revisited several times. We went back to the original interviews and our notes and stuff like that as we were coming up with the final themes. And we also did do member checking during the analysis process to ensure that our findings revealed what the participants really experienced. And then, as I mentioned before in the prior slide, we then took all these findings that we had, our major themes, and we also then did a focused literature study on nurse-patient situations that require communications. And from that, we looked at themes and we compared what was in the literature to what we had. And then from there, we developed and modified a survey tool so that we could get quantitative data on what are the specific nurse-patient communication situations for entry-level practice among nursing students. So the survey tool we used was adapted from the Nurse-Patient Communication Skills Questionnaire by Maharti and his team, which can be found in the article Design and Validating the Nurse-Patient Communication Skills Questionnaire, published in the Journal of Health Management and Informatics in 2016. And I believe the information is all on the slide there. So the adaptations that we ended up making to the tool were we added 6 questions to their job duty section based on our qualitative results and what we found in the literature. We added 25 questions to create our own difficult client care situation section, and that was based on our qualitative findings and what we found in the literature. We also had to adapt the wording of the tool to make it more grammatically correct. It was a tool that was, I believe, used in a different language and then adapted. So there was some grammar that we fixed. We also changed the scale to an importance scale instead of an agreement scale, and this was to avoid a ceiling effect that was originally seen in the study's results. We did reverse questions in the survey. We reworded them so that they were no longer reversed. And this was done because of feedback that we got from faculty. When we developed the tool initially and had a draft, we sent it off to some trusted faculty to see what they felt about the tool and give feedback on it. And they found that the reverse questions were confusing and even like a double negative. So we ended up taking the reverse items and rewording them so that they weren't reversed. We named the modified tool we created the Essential Undergraduate Nursing Students Nurse-Patient Communication Skills Questionnaire. And then these were the sections that we ended up having that you can see on the screen. So we had preliminary relationships that had 4 questions. We had a section on attention that had 4 questions. And we had a section on understanding, and it had 4 questions. Job duties, which had 11 questions. Nursing ethics, which had 8 questions. And difficult client care situations we split up. So there was sensitive topics that had 6 questions, clients, which had 4 questions, and difficult ethical situations, which had 6 questions, and professional identity challenges, which had 3 questions. So to accomplish Objective 2, which was essentially phase two of our project, we had to pilot this electronic tool. So we piloted the online survey tool, and we used a convenient sample of our faculty as participants. And we did hire a professional statistician to help us analyze. We obtained descriptive statistical analysis, and we tested the reliability for the tool as well, using a chi-square and a single factory confirmatory factory analysis test. After we tested it, after it was piloted, we did realize that we needed to use a larger sample. And we also had some other revisions that we had to make to the tool. After we did this phase 1 and this phase 2, if you recall, I had mentioned before, we hope to make recommendations for appropriate and effective strategies to implement what we found into nursing curriculum, but we never did make it that far. And that is because, you can see on this slide here, the Cronbach alpha for the entire set of our items, which was 50, it did come back very high, so that was good. It was reliable. There was some sections that had lower. One of them was the attention section, and that one came back surprising because we didn't really add much to it. We changed some wording grammatically from the original, and in the original it had a higher Cronbach alpha, but in ours it had a lower one. So that was interesting to us to see and find. and it could have been due to our rewording. It also could have been due to the fact that we did have a low turnout for participants. Some of the other limitations that we had were we did, even though we tried to avoid it, we had a ceiling effect. So there were a lot of the answers were in the higher end. And it could be due to the fact that we did use a convenience sample. So people who chose to participate in our study could have chose to participate in our study because they had a strong opinion or connection to what we were studying. What else should I say to that? We did fail to recruit the desired sample size. We sent out our recruitment until there was no more people wanting to do the study. We did try to have a prize honorarium to try to recruit, but that was probably our major fallback, and due to time, we had to move on so that we were accountable to our funder and whatnot, so that is a limitation to our study. So because of our, based on the results of our pilot, we did have some revisions that we suggest to the tool. We still feel it's needed. We still would like to hopefully see it through, but we do need to have a larger sample. We also noticed, because of the ceiling effect, with the importance that maybe we should use a 7-point scale instead of the 5-point scale, and this way we'll maybe get a more of a variance in the ranges of how much they see this important to how little they see this important. We also think that maybe we should put the reverse items back just so that we do have a little bit more of a variance, and also to include some blatant unimportant items in there too as well, so that we don't have that ceiling effect. We also recommend doing some improvements to the recruitment. Sorry, I was just getting some feedback. Recruiting, we think we should maybe go to different nursing programs as well, instead of just doing a convenience sample. We also thought of offering a paper form of the survey and using honorariums instead of a prize, just to try to recruit. I think that was our biggest limitation, was getting the recruitment that we needed for it. So that's our project, kind of in a nutshell, short. I didn't want to go too in deep into it. I wanted to stick more to today's themes. So going back to the theme, what went well with our project? In the beginning, my colleague and myself clearly defined the project goal to ensure that we both had a clear understanding of the goal. We both made sure, he gave what he saw for the project and defining it and how it's going to go in each stage, and I did as well, and we did this in written as well as we went over it in person meeting. So I feel like that really helped us, because we really made sure that we were on the same page. We had the same understanding of the methodology, the process, where we're going to go and whatnot. Decision making was shared between us. There wasn't one person just making all the decisions without the other person's input. We didn't make a decision until we had talked to one another or had each other's opinion. We discussed elements of the project together right from the start, right from the grant proposal to developing the survey. We discussed when there was issues that arise, how we're going to try to get more recruitment and whatnot. So we really had open communication. We also had consensus on the data and results. We had a lot of discussion and went back and forth several times, going through our audit and tracking how we came up with the results, why we came up with this, until we reached consensus. So that process can take long, but I feel like it really enriched the project, as well as helped me professionally grow, and I'm sure he would say the same as well. I think another thing that went well with our project too is we really did value one another. So after any project, it's good practice to reflect so you can grow. So I spent some time reflecting on collaborative work. And one of the models that really resonated with me was the activity zone model of collaborative active research. And Lofthouse, Flanagan, and Wigley spoke of this model in their article, A New Model for Collaborative Active Research, Theorizing from Interprofessional Practice Development, in the Educational Action Research Journal. And I think the information's all on there. Anyways, these authors, they discuss collaborative active action research through time. So they talked about elements that might influence the success of a collaborative project. And one of them was time itself. And as you probably can recall, I mentioned that we had a lot of time restraints, and it was a two-phase project done within 1 year, because we had to be accountable to the funding and use all the funding within a certain amount of time. So time was of the essence for us, and we really had to be mindful of it, and it did impact our collaborative project, so that really resonated with me. They also identified the need to recognize and appreciate that collaborative work can take time away from our other responsibilities. And I found that it was really important to our project as well, and working with my colleague, because we both had different workloads. We both came from different locations, different departments, and so we really had different workloads that we were also accountable for, and we had to work around. We had to be creative because we were in different locations, so we weren't always in the office at the same time, as well as we don't even have offices in the same place. So we had to be creative, and sometimes we had to talk by phone, sometimes we did a lot of Skype meetings. We also did meet in person as well, and did book rooms and whatnot. But that did impact our collaborative work too as well, because that does all take time. Another thing that these authors talk about is that our collaborative work is also impacted by our experience before and after the project. So our collaborative work that maybe we engaged in before can impact, as well as our collaborative work during this project will impact our other collaborative work. And I could see that as well with us. So what I've learned before working in collaborative research projects, I brought to the table to this one, and maybe not even consciously took those steps, which maybe I should have. One of the things was that we, as I mentioned before, we met at the beginning and we discussed the goals. That was just something that I did because that's what we did in another one, but not really knowing that this is really an important step to take with any collaborative work. These authors also talked about contributive and collaborative work. So this really resonated with me as well, because as you can see in the diagram here, in the first one, in the contributive work, you can see there's partner A and partner B. And there's times in a project where partner A might contribute a little bit less than partner B, but that contributive work goes towards the collaborative work. And the collaborative work is on the other side, and that's when both parties are interacting at the same time, contributing equally. And I found that that does happen, even if, I mean, the bulk of our work was collaborative work, but there were times, as I said, time constraint was an issue for us, and there were certain times in our project where I had to take off time from work, and as well he had to take off time from work. So we still collaborated. We still never made a decision without each other, but there were times where, say, I collected the member checking forms for us. So that was contributive work towards our collaborative work, and vice versa. So, you know, he might have picked up the signs, the signatures for the honorariums for us. So there was some contributive work that added to our collaborative work, and I think that that was an important part to realize in our collaborative work, that sometimes there might be periods where we do contributive work and that it comes together for our collaborative work. So as you probably know, collaboration can mean different things to different people and different team members. The collaborative project I shared today worked well because my partner and I had the same idea of what collaboration was. He and I, like I said, always gave equal input. We discussed our goals, our visions, our methods for this project, but we were lucky in that sense because, as I had mentioned before, we didn't consciously take the step to really ask each other what collaborative research meant to one another. And that is an important step to take when you're starting out a collaborative project, is to make sure that you both have the same understanding of what collaboration means and having that open dialogue to avoid difficulties that can occur. Some of the other difficulties that can occur if you don't have the same idea of what collaborative research means is that you can end up having different views on things as who should be on the team. You could have difficulties listening to one another's views or being open to one another's ideas and analysis of the data. You also can have difficulties with the use of the grant fund money, what it's going to go towards, how it's going to be used. You also could have different views on the ownership of the actual results and project itself. And you could also then, I'm sure you can guess, because I mentioned before, have different views on workloads. How is this going to work? Is it shared? Is this you do this and I do this? Who's going to take on what tasks? So in the end, you can, if you don't have this discussion, you can end up with very different views on different aspects of the project. So it's good to sit down and actually have this discussion right at the start. So to further reflect and help clarify the type of work that can occur when two people come together and work on a project, to help us understand that there is sometimes different views on what collaboration and collaborative work is. The International Association for Public Participation provides us with terms that help us to assist the different types of participation in research projects within a spectrum. So just take a minute and think to yourself, what do these terms mean to you? Inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. Do they mean the same? Do you use them interchangeably? I attended a workshop this year and they asked me this question and I never thought about it. Do I use these terms interchangeably? And after reflecting, I had to say that I did at times, and it's very common. But for those who are really wordsmiths that are out there, whom I love working with, by the way, you do know that these terms are different and they mean different things. So informing can be providing updates on the project and decisions. So you're just telling someone. Consult can be getting feedback on decisions that are made. Involve means that you can make sure that someone's needs are reflected in the decision making. And collaborate means working together to make the decisions. And empowering is putting the decisions in the hands of another team member. So I have some examples of how these can come into play if you're working on collaborative research. So if you're identifying a problem and how to explore the problem, running it by the partner to make sure it captures their needs, like who you're working with, that's just involving them. It's not really fully collaborating. Discussing with a coworker survey tool to see their thoughts on the survey tool is more consulting than collaborating with them on the survey tool. Asking a coworker to join your study and then providing them with updates is also informing. It's not really collaborating. So if you have someone on your study and then they're a co-applicant or whatnot, and you're kind of doing it all and just giving them updates on how it's going, it's more just informing them instead of collaborating. And working with a coworker, sitting down to develop the project, editing the proposal together at the same time for a grant is a good example of collaborating. So you're actually working on the project at the same time, equally contributing. So I hope that kind of helps to see that sometimes there can be different views on how a research project is going to go and how the tasks and whatnot. So it's important to have that conversation with who you're working with right from the start so that you have the same understanding with how the collaboration is going to go. So what I've learned, how we can foster collaborative research, I think I've mentioned it several times, from the start having clear and open communication, discussing the roles, the responsibilities that each member is going to have, discussing the vision, discussing the goals, discussing even the hours that you will commit on each project. That's important too, so that you know that the workload's going to be shared, so that you know when to rely on them. Discussing if there's any periods of time where, you know, the person might be unavailable, if they're going to have a really busy month and whatnot, and how you're going to get around that. Also having a conversation about how to be creative. If you do have geographical locations that are different, such as are you going to use an online document, track changes, Skype, the different ways you're going to get around that to actually work on the project collaboratively. Another thing is to really go over the timeline and the different milestones that you guys have to meet so that you're aware that you can keep on track. If you don't have that conversation and only one person kind of knows that, or if you have something different in your head, you can run into difficulties as the project moves along if you don't kind of have the same timeline. Discuss meetings, how regular you're going to meet, how regular you're going to have conversations. And it's also good to have a conversation about decision making, especially around if there's going to be an issue that comes up or disagreements. How are you guys going to decide and come to a decision? It's good to have that beforehand so that you're able to address it and kind of go back to, hey, we said if we were ever in disagreement or whatnot, this is how we were going to solve it and come to a decision on it. Other elements that can help collaborative work are appreciating the accomplishments. I feel like each time, you kind of you complete a phase or you get to a different milestone, it's important to take the time to appreciate the accomplishments. It keeps the momentum going so that the momentum doesn't die out, because we can get very busy, we can get very stressed out in our jobs and whatnot, and I think that was important and has helped a lot of our projects. Another thing is having support, not just from the colleague that you are working with, but also from your organization. This can be funding as well as release time. we tend to have very busy and hectic jobs, and it's hard to manage sometimes. So if you have that funding and you have some release time, it can really help your collaborative project to be successful. So I found that those things are really beneficial for the work that I've done. So I hope you found this presentation interesting, and I hope that I said some things that are helpful. I do want to thank you all for letting me share my experience with you today, and for all those people who supported me in my collaborative research work, including my colleague and my co-PI. I think that we have time for questions, as well as if there's no questions, hearing other people's stories and their successes with collaborative research. So I guess I'll pass that over. Is that you, Bernie? If anybody has questions.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks very much. That was a really interesting presentation, and certainly we've got a bit of time for questions. I don't know if anybody's got any they want to type in or things they can share about their own collaborations. I was particularly interested, in the differences you had between, as you were talking about, contributive work and collaborative work. And I wondered how you initially developed your collaboration and what strengths you thought each partner brought to it, rather than if you'd done it sort of individually.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. I initially had an idea, and then my colleague who I worked with, Eben, I discussed it to him and presented, my ideas. And I kind of specialize in like community nursing and communication and stuff like that. And he really specializes in the area of ethics and standards. So I think you can even see how that fit and blended together in what we came up with in the end, looking at nurse-patient situations for entry-level practice. Even in the analysis, he brought, an area that of expertise that I maybe wouldn't have thought of. So we kind of started out like, hey, I had an idea, discussed with him, and he kind of said, hey, I see it this way and could see this is how I fit. And then, we ended up writing up a proposal, and then there was a collaborative grant that came up, and we ended up applying for it, and it just kind of went that way. I feel like I babble, which I probably do, and so he just really complimented me in many ways. He's short and concise and can really just nail what I'm trying to say. So I feel like I couldn't have worked on the project with anyone else, because it was a big project in such a little time that we really blended well to coming together. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks. Yeah, and one of the questions was about, do you think there's sort of opportunities for funding? I mean, you touched on it there a little bit, to go for a different funding, or to actually be able to sort of improve your chances of funding with collaborative research?
Yeah, actually, from my experience applying for grants and funding, whether it's internal or external, a lot of them will look at your project, and they'll look for if you're working in collaboration or partnership with someone else, whether it's interdisciplinary work or working with someone in another institution. So it does give you a benefit if you are working in collaboration with someone else, whether it's partners in the community or patients and whatnot. I almost say you kind of need it for getting funding.
Thanks, yeah.
Especially
another question we had from Ali was, you mentioned sitting down and talking through the collaborative partnership at the start of the project. Would you recommend a formalized agreement be reached, or is it best just to leave things informal to allow shifting abilities for roles in the project?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I said, we kind of like unconsciously did that, and through reflection and other work that I haven't done that, because I was like, how come this one worked really well, and I have worked on other ones that haven't worked really well, and I think that was a key piece. We didn't do it formally, but I think that if you work with if you know the person, I think that you could benefit from doing it formally. After reflecting on some of the projects that haven't worked as well as I would have liked them to, I think if I would have sat down and formally went through those kind of roles and responsibilities and the timeline, I think we would have had a better, more collaboration than what we did. Not that the projects were bad, but we just would have had more collaboration, which would have enriched the project. So I think if you have someone who's worked on collaborative work before, you might be able to get away with just doing it casually, but it wouldn't hurt to do it formally. And then you have it there if anything kind of arises.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, looking at other experiences, we had a question as well about power and relationships. Particularly, I'm thinking from my own experience with publishing and collaborative publishing, where sometimes there's different power structures within the team that can sort of make things more difficult if you don't have sort of some agreement at the start, where, for example, the publisher might want to do one thing where the authors want to do something different. So I think that's a very useful point.
And even like, the ownership of the project, like having that discussion at the start, because you don't want to, have later on like, okay, hey, I went and published an article on a research project and they didn't even ask you or come to you or whatnot. So then you can might create difficulties working with that person again or whatnot. So having that discussion at the start and formally like talking about, if we're going to do any articles or whatnot, let's make sure that we work together on it. I think that's important.
Absolutely. I think it's a really good point. So are there any other questions from our audience? So just give a second to see if anybody else wants anything to ask before we wrap up. Okay, looks like we're good. So I'd just like to thank you once again, Sarah, for your really interesting presentation, and for everybody who participated today. I'd just like to note that once the meeting closes, you'll be sent a short evaluation survey if you've participated about today's session, and it shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes to complete. And really, CASN do really value your responses in planning future sessions, so it's great to get that feedback if we can. And lastly, there's a recording of this session which will be available on CASN's YouTube channel in the coming days, so feel free to share that with your own research networks if you think this might be of interest to your colleagues. So thanks again, everyone, and CASN certainly hopes you'll consider attending next sessions. The next one's in French, which is about policy, I believe, on Tuesday, November 28th, 2017, and the next English language session is on Thursday, January the 25th, 2018. So if there's no other questions, we'll sign off now, and thanks very much again to Sarah and for everyone for participating.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And if you have more questions, I think my information's up there.
Perfect. Bye-bye, everybody.